those of you who are new to our climate cafes. Started recording. Thanks, Carlos. So these are a series of webinars hosted by the climate team at H&F to support residents and staff take climate and nature action locally. And these spaces are an opportunity for us to share information and ways to get involved, as well as for you all to ask questions. So before we start, I've just got a few kind of housekeeping items. While you're not speaking, please just keep yourself on mute, and there will be a chance to ask questions at the end. So do just add your questions in the Q&A function, and then we'll collect them to ask Steve and Simone later. And then alternatively, you can always come off mute and ask your question to them at the end of the presentations. And then we will be recording this session, so please just turn off your cameras accordingly. But Carlos, thank you. I think you've already started recording. Thanks for that. So here's our agenda for today. We're firstly going to hear from Simone Turner, and she's our ecology and adaptation lead at H&F, and she's going to share context around the ecological emergency in the borough. Then we're going to go on to our main speaker, Steve Bolton, who is a nature and ecology consultant for H&F. And then we're going to hand back to Simone for some ideas about ways to take part in nature action in H&F. And then we're going to go on to a Q&A. And finally, I will just share some final ways to take part in wider climate action in H&F. So Simone, please take the stage.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hope, so much for the introduction. And also thank you for providing us with the opportunity to discuss this really important topic. And thanks for all the audience for joining. So I'll be introducing the ecological emergency in Hammersmith and Fulham. So it's well known that we're currently facing a biodiversity crisis, and there are a lot of scary headlines out there, such as wildlife populations having plummeted by 73% in half a century from the Natural History Museum, and research from universities such as the Queen's University Belfast of global loss of biodiversity is significantly more alarming than previously suspected. And in the UK, we know this is especially the case. We know that we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, with now nearly 1 in 6 species threatened with extinction. And there's 5 key modern problems that are causing this biodiversity crisis, and it's habitat loss and degradation, exploitation, invasive species and disease, pollution, and climate change. I normally go into these in a bit more detail and give an example of a butterfly species that has gone extinct to each of these problems, but I'm keeping my section brief today so that we can go on to Steve, who will teach us how we can take action. And unfortunately, Hammersmith and Fulham is no exception to these problems, mainly due to historic land use change. And I think one of the best examples of this is our lost rivers, or some people call them secret rivers. So you might not know that Hammersmith and Fulham used to have 3 rivers running through our borough. Counters Creek, which went from Wormwood Scrubs down to Chelsea by the Thames. Stamford Brook, which had 3 different starting points, one of them also being Wormwood Scrubs, and then going down to Furnivall Gardens, again the Thames. And this one is actually one I only discovered today, which is Farr's Ditch. The reason we've lost them is due to farming and then housing needs. These rivers were culverted and redirected. They were pushed underground and technically lost to us. But you can still see evidence that these did exist today through place names such as Eelbrook Common and the tube station Stamford Brook. And really interestingly, if you go down to Furnivall Gardens and very carefully pop your head over the flood defence wall, don't push yourself too far out, you will see the historic outflow for Stamford Brook, which I pictured and put in the slides here. Now, you may have heard of projects across London where they're actually bringing these culverted rivers back in projects that we call daylighting. And I would absolutely love to do this in Hammersmith and Fulham, but unfortunately, the remaining bricks that we do have are mainly under people's homes. And I don't think anyone would be happy if we knocked on their door and said, we want to knock down your home to bring a river back. So unfortunately, this isn't a project that we can do in Hammersmith and Fulham, but there are plenty of other projects we have done and can do in the future to aid nature's recovery locally. And a really cute example of this is all the work that's been going on at Wormwood Scrubs. So we have a lot of positive conservation management that has seen the return of some really exciting species, such as the brown streak butterfly, hair streak butterfly. And for the first time at all this year, we've had little owls return to Wormwood Scrubs, which you can see in this picture here, which was taken by Kate McVeigh, our ecologist up at the Scrubs. I myself have had the pleasure of seeing these charismatic animals, and it's our aim to do a lot more projects in Hammersmith and Fulham, which will hopefully see more of these species return. And you have the power to help us do this and also do it in your own wild spaces, which is why I'm now going to hand over to Steve, who's going to talk about how you can take action for nature.
No.
Thank you, Simone. Hello, everybody. Yes, I should be able to take control of these slides. And yeah, I'm going to do a bit of a talk on taking action for nature in your community. As I said, my name is Steve Bolton. I'm a nature conservation consultant with Hammersmith and Fulham. My background is with butterfly conservation, delivering the Big City Butterflies project across inner London. And you can see some of the slides there, which include Wormwood Scrubs. And there's Kate, who was taking the pictures of the little owls, who I helped set up a butterfly transact. And in the top left, you can see a lot of the records that are now coming in, having established some new recordings. So it's those types of things that I've been working on in the past, and some of the other pictures show some of the habitat improvements that we've supported in the past with butterfly conservation, and continuing to do more of that kind of work in this current role. So I'm really helping to deliver, just summarising this engagement plan. We're looking to encourage participation in citizen science surveys to help us understand biodiversity across the borough and support regular data gathering in the future. Now, it's really key to try and do that regular data gathering because it helps inform site management and informs wider nature conservation strategies, and really helps us understand how population trends are changing over time. So can help measure and monitor, how habitat improvements and how sites are kind of performing and changing over time. And that's really reliant on volunteers and how people can help sort of get involved and help collect that data. We're also working to identify and develop small-scale habitat improvement plans that can be used by community groups and council officers to leverage funding. So this is something I'm going to come on to a bit more in the next few slides, but getting out there and talking to groups and giving them ideas about how sites can be improved for nature. Then also supporting the Nature Champions Network, which is fairly newly set up, and that's bringing together a lot of the friends groups and giving them advice and support on how they can drive these nature positive initiatives across the borough's public parks. And we recently did a little training exercise on a pollinator count at Ravenscourt Park, which was a really useful exercise. So I'll mention that a bit later as well. And yeah, this opportunity scoping is all about getting out there and seeing, what habitat improvements can be made, what ecological improvements can be made in certain spaces, because it's often having that experience to see what could work where, and just pointing people in the right direction. And often they can be fairly low effort interventions, whether it's a small sort of wildflower patch or some native shrub planting, can really help connect the dots and help connect wildlife habitat. So yeah, another example is there, pollinator friendly planting as well, and log piles and nest boxes as well. So these are things that I've been going out and looking to sort of support and identify where they might take place. And then I provide some notes and a bit of a report to kind of summarize what we're doing and what the recommendations are. Obviously, that needs to be checked with different park managers and agreed in terms of how it might be delivered. And for bigger projects, that can also include applying for external funding pots and getting the necessary funding in to deliver those improvements. So the images there, you can see some different examples, and that's shrub planting, pollinator planting, seeding, so a whole variety of stuff. So I can come on to some of those in a bit more detail in the next few slides. So meadow creation is something that I've supported on quite a lot of sites across inner London, and that example in the top left is Bishop's Park, actually, where working with the Friends group we identified that circular area which wasn't being used for much, but it was a kind of this circular brick feature, and we decided that would be a good spot and would make a nice kind of meadow feature. So the Friends group there removed the turf to prepare a kind of suitable seed bed and remove those competitive grasses and seeded with a wildflower mix. And if you do it in the autumn or even in the spring, and you include some cornfield annuals in the mix, and the poppies that you can see there on the image next to it are some wildflowers that flowered in that first year. So we can quite quickly, get some wildflowers established, particularly those cornfield annuals, and they provide a bit of a cover for the perennial wildflowers such as oxeye daisy and knapweed, which are more the longer term sustainable wildflowers and meadow habitat that we want to see in the longer term. But that habitat can take a few years to develop, so it does need a bit of patience. The image with the digger in is if you do want to do something on a slightly bigger scale. One of the best methods is actually to remove the topsoil to expose the poor or the lower nutrient or the poorer soil underneath, the subsoil it's called, and seeding onto that provides really excellent habitat in the long term because it prevents coarse grasses and kind of weeds taking over. And it doesn't need to cost a fortune either, because that contractor, for example, is only around £500, I think, for a day to use that mini digger to create these kind of meadow feature areas. And obviously those meadow habitats support lots of different species. So the image on the bottom left is a skipper butterfly that came in and started using that's the picture of that same scraped habitat, which flowered the following year and is already supporting biodiversity. And then in its simplest form, actually, just leaving long grass is really valuable for wildlife. But there's also this principle of cutting and collecting. So rather than many grasslands are managed by cut and leave, where the cuttings are left on the grass and rot down and add to the nutrients and just you get more grass growth. If you can actually collect the cuttings, that helps reduce nutrients and encourages more wildflowers over a period of time. So in some cases, the council might be able to use machinery to cut and collect designated areas where you can allow longer grass. Or in some cases, if it's not possible for the council to do the collecting, then volunteers could potentially rake up and assign a sort of composting area on a site to begin that meadow management process of improving the grassland. Here's another example of a kind of scraped habitat using the mini digger. This was down in southwest London, I think. So the digger scraped back the topsoil and then forms a low bank with that topsoil, so no material leaves the site, and that helps keep the cost right down, so it's not too expensive. And that bank actually helps form some sort of shelter habitat for the site as well, but it will be more of a grassy sort of bank. And then the subsoil area is seeded, and you can see this was in the second year, so those perennials and its oxeye daisy in that picture are really starting to come through. And actually, I know Hammersmith and Fulham have done lots of tiny forests, which is a great initiative. And actually, you can see in the top of that image on the right, that is a tiny forest. So where you can combine the two, you're obviously really giving nature a boost to have all those wonderful native trees and shrubs, as well as meadow area, is really going to give biodiversity a boost on that particular site. Pollinator planting, I'm sure you may be familiar with, but supporting those bees and the butterflies with a variety of planting. One of the principles there you may be familiar with is having flowering plants available right through the season, from spring to summer and autumn, and having a good variety of planting helps with that. So just some examples here of some of the different sites, like Ilbrook Common, where our my previous project helped provide a variety of plantings such as primrose and dog violet, and they're an example of spring flowering plants that can also tolerate a bit of shade. And you can obviously do more urban sites like this roadside planting verge, which helps connect bigger green spaces, and that one had things like thyme. So herbs can be very good, and hebe, you may be familiar with, is a good pollinator plant that's also quite drought tolerant and also pollution tolerant, so it's quite a good one for kind of roadsides. We did a butterfly garden in Beckton Park, and those kind of features can be really engaging and good to get the public interested and engaged. And you can obviously see some interpretation signage there and really highlighting the importance of caterpillar food plants. And so, yeah, some of the plants there are birds foot trefoil and cuckoo flower. And they are both caterpillar food plants. They're really important to support breeding populations. People are often aware of the nectar plants, but the caterpillar food plants are really important as well to support breeding populations. Then there's a few pictures there from Frank Bamfield and all the great work and lots of pollinator planting there, including combining it with kind of food growing. So that can work really well in community situations where you've got herbs that you can use in food, which are good for pollinators as well. So yeah, tree, shrub and hedge planting is definitely something that can benefit wildlife and boost biodiversity, and particularly in the same principle as the pollinator planting, having a range of a wide range of plants, particularly native shrubs, really do support the wildlife here in the UK. So there's a few examples there in the top left. It's actually disease-resistant elm planting, and you may be familiar with Dutch elm disease, having wiped out a lot of elm trees across London, but parks and councils are replacing some of those and planting these disease-resistant varieties, which are really valuable for wildlife and support a rare butterfly called the white-letter hairstreak. In grassland areas, Clapham Common, you can do a small block of shrub planting, which can be really valuable. Often open grassland is just mown or has some mature trees around it, but often doesn't have these native shrubs, which can be really valuable habitat. As you can see, that small block actually within the grassland is really useful and boosts wildlife habitat by providing shelter for birds and other wildlife. And it has spring blossom early in the year and then the berries in the autumn, so it can be a really fantastic addition to a grassland, particularly where you've got sort of larger areas of grassland. Yeah, so in addition to native shrubs, you can obviously plant trees, standard trees. So this is an oak that was put in, and I'm sure you know that oak is fabulous for lots of different invertebrates and different species. And then hedge planting can be really valuable, particularly where you've got that variety of native shrubs, so things like hawthorn and blackthorn and flowering shrubs like guelder rose, provide lots of different food sources, and can also be a great focus for having a long grass margin along the base of the hedge that you can see in that image to provide that variety of habitat and support more species. So where we do have ponds in the borough, they're a fantastic resource. Even small ponds can provide valuable habitat for lots of different wildlife, aquatic invertebrates, dragonflies, damselflies, frogs and newts. But again, the planting can be diversified. This example on the right is actually at Bishop's Park, where there's a sort of a bit of a limit on that pond's diversity with the concrete base, but actually we've suggested using some planting rolls, or coir rolls they're called, which can have wet plants within them, to add more diversity to that pond edge and a more variety of flowering plants. Just a quick mention of bird boxes. So there's a variety of boxes you can install with different sizes, which can support different species. And yeah, there's a limited amount of natural nest sites now for small birds in particular. So having the variety of nest boxes, both the open fronted boxes for things like robins, and also the boxes with the smaller holes for smaller birds like the blue tits you can see there, and larger holes for larger birds, and having that variety is really going to help, I think, provide that nesting habitat. But it is important to clean them out where possible each year. So that is a factor that to add into your thinking about how it's going to be maintained. Bee hotels. It's going to be quite a relatively simple thing that friends groups can do. I've certainly seen a few around on Fulham Cemetery, for example, recently. It is important to try and get them in the right location. So if you want them to be the bee hotels to be used, they do need to be in a sunny or partly sunny location and protected from the rain, so that they've got the right kind of microclimate. And you can use those kind of different materials from bamboo canes. You can even use bramble, which has that kind of pithy center, and the bees can remove that pithy center and use that for nesting. So these are cavity nesting bees that use these types of bee hotels, and I think that's a leaf cutter bee that you can see in a kind of hole in the wood there, and that's another thing we've been talking to friends groups about. If there are old tree stumps, for example, in a sunny spot, that's one thing you can do to drill holes of different sizes in untreated wood, to provide these kind of nesting habitats for these cavity nesting bees. Bug hotels can be an interesting addition and a nice feature to add into a site. And that one on the left is actually from Godolphin Park, which was made by the volunteers. So getting quite creative, a nice hotel there. The next image along, a very simple one, is just a bit of wire mesh with some dead leaves, some dried dead leaves inside, and a lid on. So they can be very simple, and that would just provide a good, particularly overwintering kind of habitat for bugs and invertebrates. You can use the wooden pallets, which is that classic sort of bug mansion design, and then there's just an image, that example of a bee post, which you may have seen on a few sites again, and that's where you can see the holes that have been drilled in to provide that habitat for cavity nesting bees. Bat boxes can be really useful, but it's good to understand what bats are present, and if you can, talk to the ecology team about doing some bat surveys. Yeah, these are best located along hedges and tree lines where bats feed, have to be at a reasonable height, and also have good access for the bats sort of flying up and into the boxes, away from artificial light sources and shelter from strong winds, and for maternity roosts, they do need to have a bit of sun on them for at least part of the day, and that's where you support the breeding maternity roosts for the bats. And where possible, it's good to actually fit more than one box, as you can see on those trees, and the bats can actually move between them, and choose the kind of right microclimate for their needs. That image is a tree in Margravine Cemetery, which I thought looked suitable because the crown's been a bit reduced, so there should be access, really pretty reasonably good access from a tall tree where the crown isn't too big and they can get in and out okay. Could be on the gable end of that church, for example, at the top there is another possible option. Then it's this Kent style bat box that's particularly good for community groups. You can make it yourself if you want, but it has the sort of slot underneath, and it means you can check the boxes yourself just by looking from underneath without needing a license, and you don't have to disturb the bats. You can just look from underneath. So this is just an illustration of some interesting kind of deadwood or different habitat features that were created, and this is on Hackney Marshes as part of a rewilding project. They've made a really interesting video. If you want to find out more about that, there's a link at the end of the presentation. but creating some deadwood features there, and also filling in some of the gaps with mulch to provide lots of different habitat features and habitat areas for small mammals, as well as potentially things like slow worms as well, as well as invertebrates. On the right, they also created this kind of bee tower, lots of different materials they used, and these old posts, and drilled the holes into the posts, as well as having bare sand suitable for more cavity, for bees that excavate. So yeah, the mining bees they're called. So some bare sand for those as well. So yeah, there's all sorts of sort of smaller projects that are suited to friends groups, potentially to help fill in and connect up those habitats, provide those stepping stones between sites. So we've mentioned quite a few of those. Something as simple as long grass can be really valuable. Butterfly Conservation did some recent research that showed just having long grass in people's gardens increased butterfly numbers by over 90%. So it is valuable. Flowering lawn is where you can actually just raise the cutting height a little bit of your lawn area and have plant some low growing wildflowers like bird's foot trefoil that are then allowed to flower. You can sort of cut them back and it won't kill the plant. They can still grow and they'll still flower when you let them. And then yeah, just another example of a valuable bit of planting, that flowering ivy. You can see as an important insect food source in late summer for things like butterflies and bumblebees. So particularly the queen bumblebees over winter, so that the colony, the rest of the nest kind of dies out, but it's just the queen that overwinters, and so she'll be looking to feed up on things like ivy and then hide away for the winter. So yeah, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but there's lots of different resources that hopefully might be useful in terms of where you might find meadow mixes, for example, meadow seed mixes. Advice from people like Plant Life and their Meadows Hub are really useful, that kind of meadow management calendar. Wildflower Plants Naturescope are really useful supplier, and they supply slightly bigger 9cm pot plants of native wildflowers, which is really useful. And you can see some different links there from some of the different features that we talked about, including the ponds and the meadow creation and the Hackney Marshes rewilding project, and Natural History Museum that Simone mentioned have got a really useful recording hub and a recording calendar, which kind of goes through and kind of leads me into my next slide, actually, about some of the different citizen science surveys that you can take part in through the season. So that's it on the first part in terms of habitat improvements and how you can get involved in that. But just going to quickly talk now in the second part about potential citizen science surveys. And these are things that the borough are really keen for volunteers to get involved in and help build up that understanding of biodiversity that I mentioned. So the Nature's Calendar is a really useful one to record species and events to help us understand how wildlife is affected by weather and climate change. And you can pick and choose a kind of wildlife group that might interest you. You can see the different groups there. And then they also provide this calendar of different events in nature. So at the top there is the first flowering of bluebell, or with birds, the first nest building of a blackbird, for example. So these might be in your local area or a site that you visit where you would regularly sort of keep an eye out for these events and record them. And another simple one is the signs of spring, again, to help understand the impacts of changes in the environment. And again, this could be something in your local area, on your way to work, in your local park, where you're looking out for when the bluebells first start flowering or when you first see a bumblebee. And again, that's one you can just make a note and record it online. Then the BioBlitz surveys, which is a bit like a nature recording day if you've not heard of those, but it is a good way for the community to come together and engage with the local community, because it brings together volunteers and any local naturalists in your area to record as many species as possible within a set location. So often, for over one day, you can talk to local wildlife groups or groups like the Natural History, the London Natural History Society help support different recording days, and they can bring in and help provide some experts to help identify what's there and work with other volunteers, and so people can learn in that way. An iNaturalist, hopefully you might be familiar with the iNaturalist app, which is a really useful kind of nature recording tool, where ideally you get a picture of the wildlife and you can then submit that record to help build up that understanding. And they do a whole advice section on running a BioBlitz. There's lots of information out there about how to set these recording days up. The records help inform local decision making, and you can see that example at, I think it was at Kew Gardens. They had 318 observations and 140 different species, which is really useful information and data. The grassland surveys, these are particularly useful where you've got meadow areas that you want to monitor as they're becoming established. So it's really important in terms of informing the management and informing how the meadow area is developing. And it's really taking 10 samples from the grassland. You walk across the grassland in a kind of W pattern. You can see the canes they're using in this particular case just to mark out the 1 meter square. And if you then note down the wildflower species, normally you would do it in the peak sort of flowering season, which probably is around now, to note down the different wildflowers, and there are kind of ID sheets you can use if you're not that familiar to learn some of the simple, hopefully fairly simple to identify wildflower species like the oxeye daisy or knapweed or birdsfoot trefoil. And you take your 10 samples, and then in each sample you can see the kind of number of species in each sample will give you an idea of diversity. And then across the 10 samples, if that wildflower is in every sample, that's quite abundant across the site. And then the value is repeating that each year, so only need to really do it once or twice a year. And that's really valuable in terms of informing how the site's developing and if the management needs adjusting. And we'll be providing training in this method if that's something you're interested in doing. And it's useful for just any grassland areas you're looking to improve. So as part of London Climate Action Week on the 24th of June, I think it is, at Hammersmith Park, for example, we're running a training session. When it comes to birds, so the Bird Track app is really useful, and commonly with a lot of these apps, one thing that's useful is you can zoom into your areas. You can see I've zoomed into Hammersmith and Fulham there on that image, and you can bring up any recent sightings, so you can begin to learn and sort of get a feel for what birds might be around, what other people have recorded. And then you can use this app to either add a single record, or you can see there you can create a kind of list as you're walking around a site, and you're getting familiar with the birds on the site. Then it's a really useful way of submitting those records. And if you're learning, there's the Merlin Bird ID app, which is quite useful because it identifies the bird song and the bird calls, which is really useful if you're learning to learn the calls, because often birds might be hiding in the trees or the shrubs. And we can request data. So if people are doing surveys, we can ask the BTO to share the data. So that's really valuable. So a few more insect survey. So the flower insect timed counts. This is an app again, the Fit Count app that you can see there, which is a 10-minute count of insects visiting target flower species in a 50 centimetre by 50 centimetre square. And ideally, you complete several counts to build up that kind of data in one location. And it's just for the kind of spring and summer period, completing it in good weather. And you count all the insects that land on a target flower species, and you're just identifying to the broad insect groups that are shown in the images. So you don't need to know what type of bumblebee, you just need to tell the difference between a bumblebee and a honeybee, for example, which with a little bit of practice, once you get your eye on, is relatively simple to tell the difference. And if you go onto that app, there's lots more ID sort of tips and information and images to help you kind of identify those different groups. So as well as using the app, the Fit Count app, which is quite good for monitoring very small areas, if you want to complete more of a site survey of a park, then you can use the same kind of group ID method to complete a walkover survey, and there's a form we can provide you with to do that. So for example, at Ravenscourt Park, we did a training session, and having had a walk around the site, we identified one grassland area which had a nice hedge and lots of flowering bramble, and so we did a walkover survey walking along that feature and filling in the form of how many bumblebees we found, how many honeybees, which will provide valuable baseline data. And if you then do that in future years, you can then begin to compare the data and get a better understanding of if the trends are going up or down or how they're responding. There will be a natural fluctuation, of course, with the weather, but over time you can build up that kind of trend, which is really useful. Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to now repeat that survey. And we did, on that bramble kind of patch, we had 40 pollinators. Then we went and repeated a similar survey. We did a bit of a loop round walled garden, and we had 36 pollinators made up of those different groups. iRecord Butterflies app is really useful. And butterflies are a really good indicator of the health of a site, fairly easy to identify for a beginner. Particularly in the peak season, it's good to do some butterfly recording in late July. And this app shows what's flying now in your area that you can see. So it gives you an idea of what you're likely to see, and if you click on any of those images, you get more tips and information. And again, you can complete a kind of walkover survey, complete a species list using that app. And you can see an example there of a little wormwood scrubs survey, a walkover survey I did. And yeah, moth surveys. So the council, we do have a moth trap that we can loan out to people, and this can be a really interesting, useful way of moth recording, where you use a light trap to attract the moths. You can then identify what you've got, and there's an iRecord, a feature in the iRecord app that lets you record what you're seeing. And then you can release the moths the sort of following day, so you don't harm any moths by using the trap. And there's a really useful app online called What's Flying Tonight, which again brings up what you're likely to see in your area at that time of year, so it really narrows it down. And again, there'll be local experts, there'll be local moth groups that can support if you are interested in getting involved in that. And yeah, I think that's it from me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve, for giving us so many examples of how we can take action to aid nature recovery. And I really hope you guys, the audience, are inspired and given ideas to take action. If you do want to run any of these sorts of projects in our public spaces, such as parks, the cemeteries or estates, please do reach out to us to make sure you get permission before you begin, just to make sure that your vision aligns with ours for the long term, because we'd hate for your hard effort to then go to waste if there is changes in that area. If you don't know who to contact, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at ecology@lbhf.gov.uk, and I'll make sure that you're sent to the right service, or I can ask on your behalf. And we also might be able to aid you with funding and developing your ideas, so please do reach out to us. But if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all those different ways that you can take action, there's a few things that I'd like to encourage you to do. And the very first one is join us in person during London Climate Action Week, which is just 2 weeks away now. So we have a few different events going on. On Monday, the 23rd, we'll be at Eelbrook Common from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We will be in slightly different parts of the park in the morning and the afternoon. So do make sure that you look at the link that Hope has shared in the chat for London Climate Action Week to get the details. And again, you can just email me if you'd like clearer details. And then, as Steve has mentioned, we'll be doing a really big nature day at Hammersmith Park. So on Eelbrook Common Day, it's just going to be me, myself, and our meadow consultant. But at Hammersmith Park, we'll have Earthwatch running tiny forest activities. Steve will be there, our meadow consultant will be there, and again, I'll be there. And then finally, there's also events on Wednesday, the 25th of June. So in the morning, we'll be at Wormwood Scrubs running a nature walk to celebrate our local nature reserve, which has just been designated recently. And then in the afternoon, there is the Climate Summit, the big main event of the week. So like I said, please look in the chat, click that link to find out the details for what's happening during London Climate Action Week. You can also join your local friends groups or the nature champions. So most of our parks, but not all of them, do already have a friends group. It's really easy to find out if there is one because the vast majority of them have their own website. So literally just put it in Google, friends of whatever park you're thinking of. And they'll usually have a way that you can join up or send questions to possibly join. If your local park doesn't have one, we'd really like to encourage you to start your own friends group. Our friends groups are so important. They do so much, and they help inform us to make decisions. So do again, just email me at the ecology email if this is something you'd be interested in. And alternatively, you can become one of our tree keepers at any of our tiny forests. So we have 5 or 6 at the moment. We've got one at Hammersmith Park, Wormholt Park, North Norland Open Space, Eelbrook Common, Frank Banfield. I think that's all of them. I might have forgotten one. But please do, if you'd like to sign up to this, and there's a link on that slide to get involved. You'd be contacting Earthwatch directly and they can send you to the local tree keeper group for each park. And then finally from me, please do sign up to our Climate Connect so you don't miss out on other opportunities. We always advertise our upcoming ecological events, such as those coming up in London Climate Action Week, and our giveaways, such as our free tree giveaways, which we do twice a year in the winter time. And we might be running some more bat walks this year around late August and September, so do keep your eyes out. And I think now I'll hand over to Hope.
Thanks, Simone, and I hope everyone can hear me and see me. I know it was a bad idea to host a climate cafe on Friday the 13th. Something must go wrong. So hopefully you can hear me with my Wi-Fi. Now we're just going to have a bit of a chance for you guys to ask any questions from Simone and Steve. We have had 2 in the chat, so I'll just ask them first. Firstly, Simone, maybe you can answer this.